Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 289 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Today, Mark Huelsing from Exo Mountain Gear and the Hunt Backcountry Podcast is on the show with us to talk about his recent Dall Sheep hunt up in Alaska. Now, as you'll learn here shortly, this hunt was quite the adventure with lots of emotional ups and downs along the way. Now, he did eventually get it done, though, and he tagged a great-looking sheep on this hunt. But that whole experience seemed like a giant roller coaster ride, and it sounds like it really tested the limits of human endurance as well. Now, before we get started going into the details of this hunt, and it was a pretty wild hunt, please make sure you are on my mailing list by signing up at huntingguns101.com. You'll get my free ebook when you sign up there, plus you'll also start to receive the email updates I send out every weekday after you sign up. If you like the Big Game Hunting Podcast, you will love those emails, which are both entertaining and informative. I get feedback all the time from people who get those emails telling me how much they enjoy them. So click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up there. Additionally, please do me a big favor, pause the show right now, hit that subscribe or follow button in whatever podcast app you are using. I would also greatly appreciate it if you would leave a rating and or a review for the show as well. Doing both of those things helps me reach other hunters like you who enjoy this sort of content, and it costs you nothing to do. Okay, let's get started talking to Mark about this great hunt up in Alaska. Well, good afternoon, Mark. It is always great to have you on the show, especially when we're talking about a really cool and successful hunt like you went on with the sheep hunt.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's good to be back. Honestly, just fun to catch up with you personally, even.
You know, so like you and I were just talking a second ago, you were last on in episode 257 to talk about the new K4 pack. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more on this show as well. You were also on in episode 77 and 86 talking about just Exo in general, talking about your initial hunts going out west, doing self-guided archery elk in Colorado. And then we had Steve Speck on talking about his successful bighorn sheep hunt in Idaho, episode 186. So over the years, had a lot of stuff going on with Exo on the show, and I'm glad to have that continue.
Yeah, it's fun to be back. I honestly forgot about those early episodes, but yeah, I think we talked somewhat about my origins of starting hunting out west. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, that stuff was a long time ago, man. That was probably 3 years ago. You and I were doing those episodes. It's been a while, and you and I have been in touch with each other for probably about 10 years now, too.
Yeah, that's wild, isn't it? I was going to say it's been over a decade that I started that process, that I started hunting out west, but it sure has gone by quick as well.
I think it was 2013 you and I started talking to each other, you know, when I was just starting my blog and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, so how did this particular sheep hunt come about? Can you tell us a little bit about the background of just how it all got started?
Yeah, that alone is kind of a wild story because as many hunters do, they dream or think or, you know, would love to go sheep hunting, but also look at the practical realities of cost and opportunity and think, man, I don't know if that's ever going to be for me. And I was in that camp of, which I think a lot of guys are, man, maybe one day, maybe if I save enough for, you know, years and years and years, when I'm older, I'll be able to make this happen. And to be honest, I still was like squarely in that camp, but I went on a mountain goat hunt in Alaska last fall. And the guide and outfitter that I went with, Mark Huelsing, he owns and self-operates. It's just kind of a one-man show, guide and operator, which is pretty unique. Guide and outfitter. I went on a mountain goat hunt with him. I had gotten to know him over previous years. He had done a death hike with us. And so we had, you know, a good connection and did that mountain goat hunt. And that was amazing. And just stayed in touch and, you know, we're somewhat friends outside of just that hunt and things like that. And I think it was late February, it may have been early March of just this year, in 2023, we were exchanging messages about something else. And he mentioned in this email, like, oh, and if you think there's any remote possibility that you would be interested in hunting sheep or be able to hunt sheep this year, let me know. And of course, I'm like, well, I got to hear more about this, right?
Right.
And so I give him a call, and it's kind of a long story, but he found out about a sheep opportunity that wasn't even originally on his radar, and there was a non-resident opportunity to do it. And so it was a new hunt for him, and he was interested in trying it. You know, he guides sheep, but not typically in this area or for this tag. And so he's like, hey, I'd love to explore this opportunity as a guide, but I don't want to take, a client in there without me getting some experience. And so if you're interested in going, like maybe it's something we could do together. And I was like, well, heck yeah. So anyway, that's how it came about. I didn't plan to hunt sheep this year. Didn't know that I would ever hunt sheep. Definitely wasn't on the radar to do anytime soon. Obviously I had the desire, but I just didn't think I had the capability to do it. And all of a sudden it went from being a pipe dream to being a reality. And it even still, John, truly, honestly, I walk past my ram every day. Spoiler alert, I kill a ram. I walk past it every day and just kind of like shake my head in disbelief that not only it happened, but just honestly that I had the opportunity. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, so I listened to I found out that you went on this sheep hunt when I listened to your podcast, when you talking about it afterwards on the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. It just, everything about it seemed like an almost surreal experience. There have been only a few instances where I have listened to a podcast and laughed out loud on something that's, you're not even trying to be funny. It's just how it worked out, right? and yours was one of them. And so I'm excited to share this with the audience because I just enjoyed hearing the story about the hunt so much myself, and I'm sure they will too. So you mentioned that you'd hunted goat with this guy previously. You'd also been to Alaska multiple times for Sitka black-tailed deer as well, right?
Yeah, I've been to Kodiak. Actually went again this year. So I've been to Kodiak a few times. I had done the mountain goat hunt. I had done a caribou hunt. We did one of our death hikes in Alaska. So I think this was, my 7th trip to Alaska in total. But it's so funny. Like that's easy to throw around, like been to Alaska, but I mean, you overlay Alaska on the lower 48, you realize how big it is. And then, I've been everywhere from like the northern Brooks, like in the Arctic Circle, all the way down to Southeast Alaska, Kodiak Island. Now in this totally different area that I've hunted sheep. And I mean, Alaska's wild no matter what, but it does have variety. And so I've been there a handful of times, and that helps, but it was also like, this is still something totally new, right? New species, new area of the state, new logistics, and just super exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Alaska is gigantic. It's bigger than, I think, Texas, California, and Montana combined. So the next three biggest states. I've been to Alaska too, but I've been to one tiny little island down in southeast Alaska and went fishing there. And so that, while I've been to the state, it's that was by no means representative of the rest of the state. Parts of the state are like that, but yeah, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on there, and I darn sure haven't hunted anything in Alaska as I record this, and so sure you have a tremendous diversity of experience up there between the sheep, a goat, the deer, the caribou, all that stuff all over the place. So let's dive in a little bit more to the story of this particular hunt. Can you just start, from day one and tell us the story of the hunt in general terms, and we can dig into certain aspects as needed.
For sure. Yeah. So I found out about the opportunity, like I said, kind of in March, and then it wasn't a sure thing until it was either April or May of when it was like, all right, have the tag, signed a contract, like this is happening. And then, just thankfully I do have a lot of experience in Alaska, but just backpack hunting. And so there were certain things where it was like I was considering gear and training and preparation. But on the other hand, I felt, kind of as prepared as you could be to go on relatively short notice. And then it was kind of a good thing I felt somewhat prepared because my family and I ended up moving that summer.
Oh my goodness.
And we hadn't moved in 16 years. And so it was like, it was a big move with 2 kids, and it was local. It wasn't like even out of state, but still like moving was a lot. Getting ready to sell a house and buy a house, as people know, is a lot of work. So that was all the summer. And just this hunt came quick. Like it came super quick. Over that time, Mark had the opportunity to get into the unit we were able to hunt a couple times over the spring and the summer. And so it was fun. He scouted some rams, found some rams, found one ram in particular that when he sent me this photo, I think my jaw probably literally dropped. I mean, I was just like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful ram. And he found that ram and then went on a subsequent scouting trip just, I think, timeline gets so messed up, but I think just like 3 weeks before my hunt, he went to go try and relocate this ram and found him again. And so again, Mark is sending me photos and videos of like, hey, here's this ram. I've, found him twice now in roughly the same area. Man, this is looking super promising, right? So the hunt really started with a very solid plan to go to a very specific spot and hunt a very specific ram. And so that's what we did. We geared up, and this was all on foot. We didn't fly or anything. So we made a hike into the area where this ram had been living. Mark had seen him basically in two separate basins, but they were kind of adjoining, so a pretty similar spot. And had a real clear plan. On the hike in, we were going in before my tag started. And, we were working back towards this particular ram where he had been, but there was also some huntable country and other sheep on the way. And so we did kind of stop on the way and we glassed some other sheep, but it was a windy day. The sheep were pretty far off. They just didn't have great visibility or stability with the wind to really pick apart these other sheep. And so we kind of walked away from those sheep to get closer to where this other ram had been hanging out. And, that was kind of still plan A. Let's go hunt this ram. And it was exciting to have this ram, but I was also a bit torn on, honestly, the potential of going on a hunt like this and having a ram pre-scouted and just going and killing it. I've never, my hunting history is like been pretty much on my own. Like I haven't done a lot of guided hunts. It was just this one previous mountain goat hunt with Mark, and then now the sheep hunt with Mark. And that's required by law for those species in Alaska to go guided. And just, as exciting as it was, like through the spring and summer to get updates from Mark and to know he's scouting, and I certainly, and he knows this, appreciate his efforts in doing it. It was still like, man, I don't know what's going to be like to, if this goes quick, to just like, quote unquote, walk in here, find a ram we knew was living in the area and shoot it. I was excited, like it was a gorgeous ram, but I was like still just torn. So there's a lot of thoughts and honestly mixed feelings going into it, but definitely a lot of excitement. And anyway, we get up and locate this ram the next morning, which is still the day before my tag starts. Locate this ram in the morning. He's with two other rams, which he had been on previous trips where Mark had scouted them. It's just the three of them back in this tucked away basin all by themselves. So it was really exciting to know he was there. Opening day is tomorrow. Just again, looking at him in person now, just a gorgeous ram. And we kept our distance and played it smart. And this was in the morning, so it's like, okay, well, let's go cover some other country and we'll come back in the evening and check on him again, make sure he's still there. And so we did. We left that basin, hunted some other country. Weather was mixed. It was still pretty windy. And we knew, so there's more rain and wind coming in. And we were debating on sitting on this ram all night, like staying out all night and just being there for quote unquote opening morning. And one thing that's interesting with Alaska as well is there's actually no shooting hours. So essentially when the clock rolls midnight and it's a new day, if you had enough light, you could shoot this ram at 12:01 if you wanted to.
So are you there? Is this August time frame? It
is late August. That was another unique thing about my tag, is it's not the opening. It's a late August. But still, for a non-resident, this specific tag opened later. So there was good daylight, but not, as much as say early August. I think that time of year we were losing like 10 or 12 minutes of daylight every single day.
Jeez, that's wild when you get up north,
It
how
is.
fast things happen like that.
Yeah, it is wild. So that afternoon, we had left the ram, debating plans. Weather was deteriorating, precipitation and wind. And we ultimately made the call. All right, let's go check on the ram again this evening. But instead of sitting on them all night, let's go to camp, decent time, get some sleep, get some shelter because the weather forecast was looking tough, and get up really early and, get up there and essentially before shooting light, hopefully relocate him and make a play.
Mm-hmm.
So that's essentially what we did. We went back that evening. He was there, with the two other rams, the group of three. They were there. We sat and watched them again. Just super fun to watch them in their element. Again, kept our distance and was like, okay, we still have daylight, but let's go back to camp and, ride this out and then just get up super early. And tomorrow's opening day and the hunt really begins.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. The weather deteriorated, got worse and worse in terms of wind. And we had purposely set camp low in this draw to try and not be exposed up on a ridge and to stay out of the wind as much as possible. But the winds just kept getting worse and worse. And I don't mean breezy. I mean like heavy, crazy winds. And it rained. And, just that night, just tent kind of like pounding in your face. I woke up partially because I was so excited. Partially I'm just sitting there thinking about all this opportunity the next day. And partially because the wind and rain. And so didn't get too much sleep that night. Got up real early. Made the climb up to this ridge. And then basically once we come over the top of that ridge, we start to lose some elevation and kind of turn a corner, and we're able to glass back to where the rams were. And that's what we did. We got up, pretty dark, made this climb, just full of excitement, anticipation, also playing it somewhat safe, right? We don't want to charge in there too hard in case the rams are relocated at all. We don't want to bust them or have wind get to them or anything like that. And then eventually got good light, kind of got around the corner to see where the rams were and put eyes. You see the white dots pretty easy that time of year. And there's the rams, but it's two rams. And then we're like, okay. So we put the spotter up and it's the two younger rams. And the ram, the quote unquote, the ram, we couldn't see. And at first we're like, oh, there's more country than we can see. He's probably like tucked into a little draw or, a little creek bottom or just some sort of like elevation where we don't see him. So we kind of sit and watch for a while and the other two rams are moving. And this third ram just like never shows up. And it begins to be like, Mark and I were both thinking it, but we don't want to say it, but we're like, is he gone? And if he's gone, like, what the heck happened? And we watched these two rams for a while. The third ram never showed up. We, had started off being somewhat distant and cautious and kept working our way closer and trying to change our perspective to try and see the third ram, and was, kind of glassing in other areas of like, maybe he's up at the head of this basin or, in a different elevation band or something. And we ended up covering ground and getting within, I think, 500 yards of these other two rams. And it also opened up the entire basin the way we were covering country. And this third ram is nowhere to be found. And every time Mark had found this ram in scouting preseason, he was with the other two. And so it's like, why would at this point, why would he leave, or go off on his own? And
because you had seen this ram how recently, like 8 hours previously?
Yeah. 8 hours previously, and 8 hours previous to that. And so we're just a little bit dumbfounded. And then we kind of started wondering if he left, but we're pretty confident he wouldn't just leave these two. And the only other possibility is there was a resident season for the same area that ended the previous day. So essentially the non-resident portion starts on, say, Saturday morning. I don't forget the days were, but if the non-resident portion starts Saturday morning, the resident portion, which had been open for a few weeks, ends Friday night. And it was like, well, we were just here last night and this ram was just here. Like, what are the odds that a resident somehow found this ram with a little bit of daylight left last night and killed it? And that at the end of the day, that ended up being what happened. So we sat there on these two rams for a while, talked about that remote possibility that was killed last night, talked about, could he have left? Could he have gone somewhere else? And so we were like, all right, well, he has to be like up over the saddle or something. So we leave the two rams, one of which probably was legal, but we were just so set on this other one that we walked away from what was probably a legal ram, and in fact did end up being a legal ram, because a different story, but I know the guy who ended up killing this ram like a week later. So we leave those two rams, cover country, looking for this third ram, the one we'd been targeting. And this whole time, even during the day now, the weather's just getting worse. I mean, these winds are... Anything I say just sounds like an exaggeration, but we are literally... They're pushing us over. Like Jeez. You would be walking, kind of side hilling on scree, and there was times you would just either be forced to from the wind or have to prevent falling. Like you would have to like tuck into the mountain or sit into the mountain.
Do you have any idea how fast of wind we're talking about here?
I mean, I don't... From what... we didn't obviously carry a wind meter, but from what I've read and talked with people, if it's like I weigh 185 and I'm wearing a pack and carrying a rifle, like I have 200 plus pounds of mass with me and my gear, and it's moving me, like flat out moving me. And I've looked at different things, and basically it's like probably 70 miles an hour easily. And it was forecasted for the nearest weather station, which was obviously a bit away, to have 70 mile an hour winds. And that's kind of down in elevation, and we're obviously up on the mountain. So I think it would be in that range.
Man. Yes. I mean, I've heard stories of wind that high, especially up in the mountains in Alaska, and especially what you're talking about with it just beating on your tent all night long and keeping you up.
Yeah.
That would have been a mess trying to shoot in those conditions that day too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talked about that. Like, even if we find this ram, we talked about that previous night. Like, we go up here opening morning, find this ram, because it's been windy all night. It was windy in the morning. Like, at what distance can I shoot? And I mean, that was a very real thing that we were debating and thinking through. Ultimately didn't have to set up for a shot opportunity so we can find the ram. So anyway, the winds are getting worse. We can't relocate this ram. We're covering ground. We're trying to use the ridge system and peek into this basin and that adjoining basin, etc. And the wind gets so bad that we had left our camp, and we thought we better go check on our camp, make sure we don't lose it. Like, the winds were that bad. And even though we tried to tuck it away, we knew that the night before the winds were hitting us hard. I mean, you would hear the wind come up the draw audibly and then just like smash the tent at night. It was wild. So we're like, all right, we better go check on camp. This is getting worse and worse. So we drop elevation, go down. We can see as we're approaching this draw that we had set our tents in, that the tents were standing, but obviously getting rocked. And so we see them, and we're obviously a bit dejected. We're still wondering what the heck happened to the ram. Like, where did he go? There's no way he could have been killed. Could he have been killed? Like, we just don't know. Like, for months, we had scouted this ram, watched him, knew where he lived, saw him twice the day before. Like, we're just kind of at a loss. Getting our butts kicked by weather. We're approaching our tents, and we're like 10, 12 feet from the tent. My tent was the one we were closest to. And Mark goes, there's a backpack. And at first I'm like, what are you talking about? And I kind of look at him and he kind of points over to my tent and there's a backpack outside of my tent, a Badlands backpack. And right about that time where I'm just processing, why is there a backpack outside my tent? My zipper of my vestibule goes zzz, and a dude crawls out of my tent. And Mark and I look at each other like, what is going on right now? You know? And not only does a guy crawl out of my tent, but right behind him, a dog pops out. So a guy and a dog are in my tent, sheltering from the storm. And he gets out and he's like, I'm so sorry, man. Like, I was wet and cold and I couldn't get out of this wind. And I had a camp, you know, and he kind of points up over there. He's like, I had a camp up over there yesterday and a bear came and destroyed my camp. And so I lost my tent and my food. And then I was out and about last night and like wasn't sure what to do. And I stumbled upon a ram and I shot a ram last night. And then I had to like take care of this ram. It was just before dark and I got soaking wet and I just didn't know what to do. I stayed all night with this ram. And I'm like, we're both like, number one, there's a dude in our tent.
Yeah.
Number two, you shot a ram last night? And then, I mean, obviously it clicked. So this ram had a very distinct chip out of his horn. I think the only thing that to me makes sense is that he had been shot at and like had, I mean, a big chip out of his horn. I think it was bigger than you would get from fighting, but he had this, like even in the summer, like when Mark was sending me photos and videos, like you would see this white piece in his horn that was like exposed. And so immediately I'm like, yeah, did that ram have like a big white, you know, kind of chip out of his horn? He's like, yeah, that's the one. Did you guys see it? I'm like, yeah, we saw it. We've been watching it and we were going to try and kill it. So yeah, that was how the hunt started. That was like day 3 with, you know, it was the first real hunting day, but like we had went in there 2 days before season. The day before season, we had scouted this ram, watched him twice. And then now it's the third day. It's the day of my opening day. And
so this guy that's on the previous hunt to yours gets into some trouble, gets his tent destroyed by a bear, and he's wandering around out there, bumps into this sheep, and then ended up killing it with just hours left before his hunting season ends, and just a couple hours before your season begins.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, we left that ram. I forget the exact times, but like we left that ram at like 7:30 or 8 p.m. that night. And between then and midnight, or whenever he lost shooting light, because I don't think shooting light really went to midnight, but I do think it was like close to 11, with hours of his tag ending, and within hours of us sitting there watching it, and within hours of my tag beginning, he stumbled upon it and killed it.
So this guy got a heck of a story out of his hunt too.
He got a heck of a story too. Yeah, and he's a resident, and this season, like I think it was a 2 or 3 week season. And so he had been hunting on and off that entire time. Like he had been hunting for a couple weeks and made, you know, different trips. And, he wasn't hunting this ram in particular. It wasn't like sitting out and watching it. He had been hunting for a couple weeks and found it like within hours of his season ending. So,
well, and I assume he ended up making it off the mountain safe and all of that stuff.
He did. We offered him some like food and do you need anything else? And he had an inReach and had inReached a buddy who was on his way in to bring like some food and dry clothes and to help them pack the ram off the mountain.
Okay.
So he was like in pretty rough shape. Like he was jackhammering and shivering and he was wet and he was cold and it's still very windy at this point. And he didn't have a shelter other than ours. But he was, we kind of tried like, you know, giving him stuff. He's like, no, I inReached my buddy last night when I killed the ram and he's on his way in now. And, was still a little concerned about leaving him, but we ultimately, left him. And I mean, went into it, as we were standing there talking with him, these winds are just destroying our tents, like laying them flat. And we had Hilleberg tents, and I'm not saying anything bad about Hilleberg. If people know tents, like they know Hilleberg tents are like built for very tough conditions. And we're standing there and these tents are just like, the poles are bending in and the tent's literally laying flat. And so Mark and I are like, what do we do? Like, the ram's been killed. The weather's absolutely terrible. We're not sure if we can survive another night up here with the shelter in these conditions. The winds were they were getting progressively worse, and the relief wasn't for like another 24 hours later. So we ultimately decided, I think part out of a good decision of like logistics and part out of like, we are so dejected and don't know what to do and can't believe this happened. Like, we're coming off the mountain. And so we go to pack up camp. I'm helping him pack up his tent because it's like a 2-man job, because it's literally wanting to blow away. You can't, like, I sat on the top of his tent so that he could pull the stakes out and slide the poles out without, the whole thing blowing away. And then we were going to flip and then do mine. Well, while I was sitting on his tent and he's breaking it down, my tent's rocking and going, and my poles actually ended up snapping and like snapped. And then where the aluminum snapped, there was a sharp edge. So the poles are in a pole sleeve, but that sharp edge went straight through the pole sleeve. And so by the time we got back to my tent to pack it up, I mean, there's literally sections of poles like 10 feet away from the tent. And it was completely unusable. So like, well, we don't have a choice at this point. Like, we had already made a decision we were going to leave, but now we don't have a choice. So, it was a long hike off that mountain. Between the weather was still pounding us, the ram that, we had put our chips in that basket, he's gone in a wild circumstance. It was just a weird, I didn't envision this. Like, I didn't think it was going to be easy. I didn't expect, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to, as I said, like, hike in there and kill the ram, but I certainly didn't expect it to go down this way. And so we're hiking off the mountain, and I'm like, okay, like, I wonder what plan B is, And we had obviously talked about some other options, other areas, but, sheep hunting is not so simple to where it's like, okay, if we're going to move areas, there's a lot of logistics involved and stuff like that. So one of the areas we were interested in hunting was across a water system, and we had actually packed some pack rafts back in the truck of, hey, if we need to hunt across this water system, we can pack raft across it and then hike in from there. Well, that water system, because all these storms, was so blown out that we couldn't actually even pack raft it. So, long story short, Mark got access to a boat, like a legit boat, and we ended up crossing this water system, and then hiked from there. So we basically, it took a little bit of time. We had to get new shelter, obviously. We had to grab this boat that he borrowed. So it was like the following day, we kind of re-gear up, get across this water system. It's a big hike in from there once we cross the water system, but it's like, okay, everything else, that's behind us. Like, we're in a new spot. It's a new hunt. We go in with like 8 days worth of food and gear on our back. And so we did that. We hiked up a big creek system. There's no trails up here. So like, every mile you're getting is fought for. And it was about 6 miles up this creek system to put us to a spot where we kind of wanted to start looking for sheep. The creek system basically kind of separated 6 miles up and like went into a few different draws and opportunities where we could look for rams. And so we did that. We made that hike. It was, tough in spots for sure. Kind of get to where it frays out, and then now we're able to look up different country in different directions. And by the time we ended up doing that, it was close to dark, but we were able to glass, saw some sheep initially just in a super tough spot though. Like they were in like goat type cliffs, which was interesting to watch. But it was like, oh, in the morning maybe they'll, be out of the cliffs and like out to feed or something like that. So tough hike in, but new spot, saw some sheep, super encouraged, set camp, wake up the next morning, and those sheep close to camp are still just in cliffs. And we think there's a legal ram in the group. So we're looking at him, and then we're looking at the country and trying to assess, one, can we get up there and get into shooting position? But two, if this ram stays in these cliffs and we shoot him, is he recoverable? Which is something you run into with like mountain goat hunting, and thankfully Mark has a lot of experience doing that. It's not as common to have to worry about that with sheep hunting, but that was definitely like the country that this ram was in. And so we kind of sat on him for a while, made the decision that he's not off the table, but he's definitely not in a good spot right now. So let's keep hunting. Let's cover some country. And, there's quite a bit of country we can hunt from where we're at. So we don't move camp. We leave camp where it's at and kind of start, we have these different systems to work up and work one. And anyway, long story short, over the next handful of days, I think 3 or 4 days, we cannot find a legal ram. This one ram we're pretty sure is legal. I don't know if he was moving and feeding at night, but he was never leaving these cliffs. We saw some other sheep in the distance. Didn't have time to close the distance on them, either for a shot or to 100% confirm that they were legal. So we backed out from them. We made a big push the next day to get back to that band. Was able to sneak within, I think, 600 yards on those, confirmed that the ram was just not quite legal. Probably a 7-year-old, just sub full curl. So that was, it's fun. We're seeing some sheep, but not great numbers, and just can't turn up a legal ram. And like that ram in particular, he was super heavy mass. Like I thought he was going to be legal, and we made a big effort to get up to him. And then you're there and you're within distance and looking through the spotter, and you just can't make him legal. And basically just spent a few days in this country, which is amazing country. It's like glaciers and these massive mountains, and we had some wind and rain and mixed visibility on and off, and it was good. But it's like at this point we're getting 6-7 days into this hunt, and it's amazing, but it's also like, man, I just can't believe everything that's happened. Like this ram gets shot out from under us. Now we're close on these and we can't make them legal. And, it's, you get that far into an adventure like this and it definitely starts to wear on you. And so talking it over, Mark's like, I think we need to make a big move and to push into some new country. Like we kind of exhausted what we could reach from where we were at in these few days. And so we made the decision to pack up camp, get up and over this big pass, and it opens us up to a whole new drainage of this mountain range. And I was on board for that for sure, because I felt like we had exhausted what we could hunt from where we were at. But pushing up and over that pass and getting to this new country definitely was a big effort from where we were at in a way. But I'm thinking like, if we go up and over there and kill something, like, ooh, it's a really big effort to get back. And so I was like, all right, like I was willing to do it. I knew we could do it. I've done a lot of pack outs and crazy hikes and stuff like that, but it's definitely like pushing that edge of my comfort zone. But that's ultimately what we did. So we pick up camp. I still have a few days of food and stuff left. Make the hike up, push through this big mountain pass. This gorgeous country. Saw some moose on the way, and just, I mean, you go through these like swings of mental and emotional ups and downs of like, this is tough and it's disappointing and I can't find a legal ram, to like these moments where like, look where I'm at. This is absolutely amazing. There's no better place on earth. This is unbelievable. and just all those swings.
Yeah,
But
right. Yeah.
yeah, we push up through the pass, kind of working towards some mountains, but are running out of daylight. So like, all right, let's set camp here. We got a lot of country we can glass. Before we push further or go in any specific direction, like set camp, glass, we can see for miles, and then hopefully find some sheep, and they'll tell us what direction we need to move for tomorrow. So that's what we did. We covered quite a bit of country. We did see some sheep, probably 2.5 miles, I think, away at this point. But it's like, even with a good spotter, it was like, yeah, I mean, I think there's some rams in there, but it's also not like for sure a shooter ram. So it's like, is that direction we want to go? Should we go, look through some other areas? And it's over like we had to cross like two big glacier systems to get over to the 2+ miles where they were. But go to bed, next morning, wake up, those sheep we can still see way off in the distance. We're not seeing anything else. So clearly, like, let's go after the sheep. And kind of keep working that way. And we make it over one of the big glaciers. And at this point, the weather starts kicking our butt again. Not with, like, we had rain and mixed visibility in the last handful of days, but these winds are back. And I'm like, it's starting to feel like a repeat. Like, are you kidding me? And so we cross this glacier. It's mid-afternoon, and these winds are terrible. And we have another glacier to cross. And crossing these glaciers is kind of dangerous at times in certain ways and in certain spots. But then when you add these winds and you have a lot of instability where you're exposed and they're literally pushing you, as you're crossing these glaciers, you have to be really selective with your footing. And so you can't be like pushed and like stumbling, because if the wind's pushing you and you need to step off to the side, like, you just may not have good footing to do that. And so we ultimately made the call, like, we can't really cross this second glacier in these winds. And so we're kind of stuck between the two. We have to set up camp, but it's midday. We have daylight. Like, I want to be hunting, but we can't really cross this glacier. And where we were between them, we didn't have great visibility either. And so we made the decision, and I think it was a good decision, but it was a tough decision of like, we just need to set up the tent, and we're going to have to lose the rest of this hunting day. Like, the first half of the day, we were able to cover ground. We are working towards sheep, but now we can't see them. We can't really see other country. It's probably not safe to cross this glacier. So we essentially sat there and had to ride out the rest of this day in the tent. And, by now it's like day 8 of hunting, and a lot has happened. There's a lot of them even skipping over. And it was tough. Like, when we very first made that decision, set up the tent and got in the tent, I was just kind of like, man, like this is tough, But honestly, the more we sat there and I just had time to kind of get over it and get back to no, this is part of the adventure. This is part of what I want. I don't want it to be easy. Like, I'm in Alaska. This is amazing. Mark, I mean, I can't say enough good things about him and hunting with him. So glad I was with him for this. And we essentially sat in that tent all day and all night and told stories, and just were forced to be in that tent. And these winds were beating us up, but we were a bit more sheltered in this spot now. So we rode it out okay. The shelter's okay. And just that whole rest of the day, I'm just thinking, just I just want one chance to have one good day of good visibility, not crazy winds, not crazy rain, just like one day. I know there's sheep over there. We were headed towards sheep. I can't see them now, but if we could just wake up tomorrow and have one good weather day, I want to hunt. I don't want to feel like I'm just out here and there's sheep, but I can't hunt, because that's what it felt like for a lot of this. It was like, I'm here, but I can't effectively hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of go to bed, wake up, and the in-reach weather forecast we were pulling was saying it was going to be a pretty good weather day. Early signs are looking like a pretty good weather day. So it's like, all right, this is awesome. Finally a day to hunt. We still have this glacier to cross. So we get kind of up on this glacier to where we have some visibility, and we can see the sheep across the glacier in the distance. It's like, yes, okay, good weather, across the glacier, there's some sheep. All right. Like, whether there's the legal ram there or not, we still don't know, but all right, good weather, and we can hunt. So we cross this glacier. It takes a while. And as we do, we're kind of talking back and forth about where these sheep had moved to. And we basically had to come up and over the backside, or kind of like go around and try and come up from beneath them. And so, we're discussing what's going to be better. We're not sure where they're positioned at this point because, they went out of sight. They went up and over. And it's like, okay, do we go up and over? Do we come around and like side hill / below them? But we're obviously not sure where exactly they're positioned on the mountain. And so we're kind of discussing all that a little bit. And it was like, all right, well, when we get to the edge of this glacier, see what the winds are doing, get a better feel for the terrain, and then we'll make a decision. Mm-hmm. And we crossed this glacier. Coming off of it was actually super sketchy, but really cool. And as we're coming off this glacier, Mark looks up to the left, which is the totally opposite direction of where the sheep had went. They would went up and over to the right. Mark looks up to the left and he's like, there's 2 rams or 2 sheep. And I kind of peek over his shoulder, and sure enough. And so we're if we come off the glacier, we're somewhat exposed to them. So we're just getting ready to come off, but we kind of hang into it, get the spotter out, and we're literally peeking around this corner, and Mark's in the spotter. And I can picture it, like him coming off the spotter, turning around and looking at me and smiling and being like, 2 legal rams.
Ah, there we go.
And I'm like, oh. And it was so it was so exciting. It was also jarring because the whole, for the last 3 hours, I'm thinking about these other sheep off to the right, and we're pursuing them, and that's where we're going, and that's what we're doing. And I'm thinking through the best approach, and all of a sudden it's like, nope, forget those. Here's 2 legal rams at a totally different location. We didn't know were there. And it was, oh man, it was so exciting. They were still, I forget, probably 800 yards off maybe, but not much cover between us and them. And so we need to get off this glacier without them seeing us. Maybe even been only like 650, I forget. But anyway, we have to get off this glacier without them seeing us, and then try to figure out how to close the distance on them, without being totally in their sight. And so getting off the glacier, we were literally taking turns. Like, I would have my binos up on the sheep and tell Mark, okay, move, you're good, move, you're good, you're good. And he would move like 15 yards, and then he would pull his binos up, and he was essentially watching the sheep to make sure I could move and they weren't looking our way. And so we leapfrog like that for a while to get off this glacier. And then when we came off the glacier, there's this big creek bottom, and we were able to work up the creek bottom. But then this creek bottom starts gaining elevation that was going to expose us again. And so we ended up like kind of backing back out and climbing up this big face on the mountain. We had to gain a bunch of elevation. So as we did that, there was this kind of finger ridge that was blocking us and them. So we gained a bunch of elevation, worked towards rams. This finger ridge that was blocking us also got super cliffy up at our elevation band. So then we had to drop elevation again. And then there was like these rocks that kind of came through. And I was like, if we can peek between these rocks at all, I think we're going to be in shooting range. And so this stalk was a ton of fun where, we go from leapfrogging to now gaining this elevation and side hilling on all this loose stuff, and then reaching this finger ridge and knowing they're on the other side of it. But now we have to drop elevation to get, essentially below a cliff where we can hopefully peek out. And it was like, we know there's rams over there. This stalk is like, it was just so stinking fun to like piece together this puzzle of, okay, they're right there, but like, what's the best way to get to them? Obviously, we're keeping an eye on wind and everything else. And then just like this buildup of, man, when we peek through the rocks, are they going to be there? Are we going to see them? And we eventually make our way to this gap. and are, belly crawling to look up and over this rise between this rock below this cliff. And sure enough, there's two rams bedded, and one is kind of facing us at an angle, and the other one is facing away from us at an angle. So the one kind of lower that was facing us, and then there was one a little bit up in elevation that was facing away. They were both roughly like 300-ish yards. I hadn't ranged them yet, but it was like, all right, they're here. We're in shooting range. They're bedded. They're unaware of our presence. We knew from the spotter before that they were legal, but still it's like, all right, let's get the spotting scope on them and double check. So we're literally just in these rocks, like peeking around with a spotter around the corner and looking at the rams. And at first Mark's doing that and I was like huddled with him, but it was like, let me even try to see like how, if I'm gonna shoot, like how I can get set up, because we're on this steep little rise, and getting my rifle up and over it, but then not exposing myself was like tough.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get below Mark, and I'm kind of like trying to get in a position where I can see him with my rifle, and I stayed close enough to him where we could kind of communicate quietly. And so I'm kind of crawling over and getting set up, and I find this spot and I really like it. And Mark's like, your barrel's not clear. Like I think you're gonna shoot into this other rock, because we're just trying to keep a super low profile. And from where I was, like through the scope felt great, but I'm looking and I'm like, I think I'm good. I think I have clearance. But then he's in my head and I'm like, maybe I don't, because he has a different perspective than I do. So I'm like shimmying up even further, but trying to stay not exposed, and finally get to a spot where, I'm prone, but essentially my body's like going down this hill, but my rifle's up and I'm set up, and I'm looking through the scope at both rams, and I'm thinking they're both legal, and he's looking through his spotter and could obviously see much better with magnification. And he's like, they're both legal. I mean, they're both legal. You can take whatever one you want. And essentially the one to the right, or the one further up the hill, was broomed on one side and not on the other. And then the one lower in elevation, which was the one facing us, was broomed on both sides. And I can see them pretty good. They ended up being like, I think it was like 276 or 278 or somewhere right in that ballpark. And I can see them pretty good through my spotter, or through my rifle scope, but obviously not as good as he can through a spotter. And so I'm looking them back and forth. They're both bedded, kind of unaware. And ultimately the lower one that was double broomed, to me just felt like an older ram. And then I also just liked the idea of, if I'm going to shoot a broomed ram, I'd prefer to shoot a double broomed versus one that's not broomed on one side but is on the other. But ultimately I was like, this lower one, just for whatever reason, like facial structure and stuff, plus he's double broomed, felt older. And I just kind of told Mark, I was like, all right, I'm going to take the lower one. He's like, go for it. And like now I just get even more jacked up than I was then. I was thankfully able to stay very calm, and not think about, the weight of this moment and the gravity of like, all right, this is like day 9, money on the line, and such a unique, rare opportunity. Like all the things of all the pressure, thankfully, wasn't going through my head. It was just me and him and 2 sheep in that moment. And the ram was bedded, completely unaware, but I had a good angle and was totally steady and let her round go. And I mean, the sheep dropped his head and never got up.
Man,
and
after
it was just
all that
like,
work, everything getting up to that point, right?
dude, it was crazy. And even then I was in disbelief of like, I killed a ram. Like, not only did I get to go sheep hunting, but like, I killed a ram. Me? Like, I killed a ram? I mean, it was truly just like crazy, unbelievable. And, it was like, Mark was like kind of high-fiving, but we were staying quiet. This other ram, the one I didn't shoot, obviously, he got up and stood up, but he just kind of looked around and milled around. And Mark was like, "Hey, do you mind if we just watch this other ram for a bit?" I was like, "Yeah, like I need a moment to take this all in." And dude, wild, like just sitting there, I can see my ram and he's down. This other ram, just even watching him was like such a treat to be where we were watching wild sheep, like glacier below us, massive snow-covered peaks above us. Like it was unbelievable. And I mean, we sat and watched the other ram for a while, and he just stayed calm and chill. And finally, Mark and I kind of stood up and started moving around more. And eventually, this other ram, because of our movement, like after minutes and minutes, kind of just walked off. And then it was, holy cow! Like I have a ram down up here, and we made the hike to get up to him and put my hands on him, which was amazing. And just looking over him and thinking, wow, this is my ram was wild. And we ended up, like, we took some photos and stuff. And then we had time, and I don't remember what was said, if I said it or he said it, but I was just like, the idea was like, we're not in a hurry. And before cutting them up and all that, like we took some photos, but before cutting them up, it was like, let's sit here, get a snack, like kind of soak this in. And I bet we sat there, talked and just with the ram, like in this, again, just unbelievable backdrop and setting. Like we probably sat there for a good 45 minutes. And that honestly was my favorite part of the whole hunt, was just like, I'm here in the wildest place ever. We're, 15 miles deep, no trail, just a truly wild place, massive peaks and this glacier and my ram. And it was like that memory, like those moments were just so cool. And eventually we obviously cut them up and had to cross the glacier to get back to our camp, and did that. So we knew what we were getting into when we were back there, but yeah, we were essentially 15 miles from where we had left the boat. And again, none of it's trail. So it was like, man, this is gonna be a heck of a pack out. It ended up being 3 miles to get back to camp that night, with crossing one of the glaciers. And then the rest of the pack out was crossing another big glacier, up and over a big mountain pass, down the other side, and then a bunch of miles out that waterway that we had hiked up. And a lot of that was like bushwhacking, just thick and nasty, because all the waterways were super swollen. Like you couldn't walk down the creek because it was just ripping. Like you were hearing boulders under the water just tumbling, and it wasn't safe to be in it. So we had a lot of work left. But we did the 3 miles back to camp, stored the meat away from camp. We'd been seeing bears, through this time. And yeah, it was just pretty surreal, eat dinner at the tent. It's dark now. Like, holy cow, we did it, after 9 days of everything and the ups and downs, we did it. And then go to sleep. And of course, I'm pretty jacked up, but I am tired, and fall asleep. And at one point I wake up in the night. I'm like, oh, that rain sounds weird. Fall back asleep, wake up again. Like, oh, I think that's snow. Fall asleep, wake back up again later. And like, I can see the tent sagging.
Oh, geez.
Like, oh, that's definitely snow. So we ended up getting dumped on with a heavy, wet snow that night. And so that made the pack out even more interesting, like crossing the glacier again, but now you can't see your footing because everything's covered in snow. And we had set up the meat with a tarp over it, and obviously that had collapsed from the snow and all that, but obviously the meat's going to be good. Everything's plenty cold, but just woke up to a ton of fresh snow and a big pack out ahead. And we didn't know if we were going to be able to make it out that day or not, but long story short, we did. I mean, it was a long day with heavy packs and snow and no trails, but just a wild pack out. And yeah, dude, it was I mean, it's easy to say this stuff like, oh, it's an adventure of a lifetime, but I mean, it truly was. Like, just and especially now, I'm a couple months removed from it. I would have been happy if we would have shot that first ram. And he was a gorgeous ram. I can't say I would have been disappointed in any sense of the way.
Mm-hmm.
But now, like, going through everything I went through and going through the ups and downs, and honestly, just part of it is getting the full experience of the challenge, but even the time. Like, I saw way more country and had way more days in the field than I ever would have if we would have like marched in there and shot that ram and been done in a few days, And it's just like looking back now, like all the struggle, all the experience, all the places. It's just like, I'm so thankful, honestly, that it happened the way it did, even though in the moment, like parts of it were incredibly discouraging for sure.
What day of the hunt did you shoot your sheep on?
Pretty sure it was day 9.
Oof, yeah.
9 of us being in the field. So it would have been like
day 6 of the season.
Yeah, like legal day, it was like 6 or 7, but it was like day 9 of us being in the field.
How long would you have potentially stayed up there? How long did you have set aside in your schedule to be in Alaska total?
I had a one-way ticket.
Yeah.
So
that
tells you anything.
Yeah, you could. Was your season was that a 3-week season?
Yeah. So what gets tricky is Mark had another hunter. So my limitation was Mark's limitation.
Okay.
Because as a guide, he had another hunter booked.
Mm-hmm.
And he had already, like, most of his sheep hunts he'll do up to like 10 days, but I think he had given me 11 or 12 total. And so it was the end of day 10 by the time we packed out. We essentially only had 1 to maybe 2 more days to hunt, but you also get into that situation. Like, let's say if we didn't kill a ram the day I killed and we didn't kill the ram the next day, we might have had, like, I may have had 2 quote unquote field days left with Mark, but we're also like probably a day and a half hike.
Yeah.
So it's like, essentially the day I killed, I would have had 1 more full day and then maybe like that following morning. But otherwise we would have been like having to get out to, get him back and to get to another client, which is, and unfortunately on my mountain goat hunt with Mark the year before, I did the exact same thing. And we went, I think it was day 8 or day 9 on a mountain goat hunt, and just another crazy, wild, long adventure with weather and all kinds of stuff. So I told Mark when he said something to me about the sheep hunt, I'm like, are you sure you want me coming? Like, after our goat hunt? And then now after doing 2 hunts with him, and both have went super deep into, almost overtime, and have been very physically difficult and not easy and not with favorable weather, I'm like, I think I'm on your blacklist. Like, I'm clearly banned from ever hunting with you again.
It's interesting. You hear stories of guys going in there and killing that target buck or bull or ram or whatever on day 1, and the guy's happy about it because he got the nice one that he wanted, whatever it was. But you go and you talk to people that have a hunt like this, that they have to deal with a lot of adversity. Talking about guys maybe that I've talked to that hunted in Africa or whatever. We tracked this one animal for multiple days through the bush and finally got him after walking many, many, many miles. Boom! Oh man, I just appreciate that so much, as opposed to, okay, we're out there just messing around looking for one animal and we bump into something else and it just walks out there, we shoot it like that. It's not that you don't appreciate it, but man, those things that you really have to work and struggle for are the ones that you really appreciate the most. And this is a good example of that, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been fortunate to have had some quick hunts, like my sheep and my mountain goat. Actually, almost everything in Alaska for me goes very far. My sheep, my mountain goat were like day 9. The caribou hunt I killed on the very, very last day of that hunt. In Kodiak, I've killed some deer early, but the best buck I've killed was on the last day of the trip. And then there's been, like, in the last 4 years, I've killed a bull on like opening day of season, which is obviously the exact, flip opposite of that.
Yeah.
And it is fun to like, oh yeah, like sweet opening day and boom. But yeah, I mean, especially I think for me, what makes it extra rewarding is that it's been on these Alaska hunts, and it's like even a non-guided hunt, like a do-it-yourself that's not relatively or not as expensive and stuff, it's like you still want to get as much out of those experiences as possible. Like, money aside, everything else, like if you're going to Alaska, you want the full experience. Like, sure, it'd be great to go up and shoot something, but yeah, I mean, you want to experience the whole thing. And for me, that's what it's all about. Like, I would genuinely much rather have a great experience and maybe not kill something than like kill something but not have had much adventure to it, And not every hunt. There's hunts where it's fine to like, hey, my goal on this hunt is to fill the freezer. That's great. But like an Alaska hunt, like a hunt that you've been waiting for, planning for, saving for, that is meant to be an adventure. Well, if that's what you want the adventure,
And, you have a couple of real challenging hunts you really have to work for. It makes you appreciate an easy one that you get every once in a while that much more.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I mean, for me too, it's been interesting to think through, like as we talked about in the beginning, having done like backpack style hunts now for, over a decade, I definitely see in me that like this sheep hunt, for example, I wouldn't have been able to do that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I don't think. And I don't mean that just from like a physical perspective, but I mean that from like the mental like experience of I've been here before. I've been low before. I've wanted to quit before and didn't quit and then had success before. So like on the sheep hunt, like I'm not immune to these moments where you're discouraged or dejected, but I also know in the middle of that, you just got to keep hunting, Like I don't care what it looks like or what the weather forecast is or how much time you have left. Like it truly is not over till it's over. And I've had multiple experiences like that. So it makes it, I don't even want to say easier for me because there's times where it's really hard, but it makes me stick with it and just know like truly anything can happen. Like anything can happen. I don't care how bad things look. If you don't give up, like there's a chance that you can find success, And I've lived that now. So it's like, the sheep hunt was just another example of like, okay, the trophy ram that I wanted is shot and the weather kicked us off the mountain and we spent more days in bad weather and we found more rams but can't make one legal. And, like there's all these things that stack up, but it was just like, yeah, I have these moments where I'm frustrated, but man, I just know we just got to keep going. And if you get to the end and you gave it all and it didn't work, well, at least you have the satisfaction of knowing that you gave it all,
Yeah, 100% true. Your hunt is, I mean, this hunt that you just described is a perfect example of just how literally anything can happen out there. I've never heard of a guy crawling out of another guy's tent like that before in the middle of a hunt after he shot the ram that the guy was after.
Well, it's like the last thing you expect, especially on like a sheep hunt, right? Like all this remote, idea of, there's few rams and there's few hunters, which in general there is, but it was like, wow, yeah, I never expected that.
If I would have seen that happen in a movie, I would have thought this is too crazy. These people are just these script writers are just making stuff up. This is ridiculous. I can't believe that.
I almost felt like that telling the story, but I do have photo evidence of me and this guy if anybody wants to question it.
Well, I believe you. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. What did you shoot that sheep with?
Rifle wise?
Yeah.
I have a 7 SAUM that I've been shooting the last few years. So it's a 7 SAUM's a cartridge, and I was shooting the 175 grain ELDX bullet. I used that on everything this year, like bear, sheep, deer, elk. It worked great. I enjoy like trying different bullets. Like in the last handful of years, I've been shooting 7 SAUM consistently, but I've shot mono metals like hammers. I've shot Accubons. I've shot the ELDX this year. Thankfully, all worked well, but yeah, I have it's super handy, especially for mountain hunts, but I built a rifle on like a folding chassis, an XLR chassis.
Okay.
And it has a nice short barrel on it. It's only an 18-inch barrel. So when I strap it to my pack with the chassis folded, it's, pretty much exactly the same size as my pack, which is great when you're not dealing with your rifle barrel sticking up and over your head or, to me, that was like the primary thing, because especially when I started shooting suppressed, it was like, I don't want this extra length above my head. But one thing I didn't realize the benefit to until I started using a rifle like this was during a pack out, like a heavy pack out in particular, when you have a traditional rifle stock and it's hanging below your pack, but you want to like just sit and take a break or something like that, when that rifle is also below your pack, it's a pain. So it is super handy. I've been using a setup like that for a few years now, and I mean, I have traditional rifles and certainly will use them, but for like a backpack hunt in particular, or something where you're packing in and packing out an animal, I can't imagine not doing a folded chassis at this point for me personally.
Have you had issues with that chassis being noisy in the field, banging into things or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, I think, there's been times where if like it's super thick, like you'll hear like a branch hit metal, but it'd be, I mean, you have a similar situation on like a branch hitting a metal barrel, right? So I haven't noticed any extra noise in particular that's worrisome. Most of the chassis, like the XLR is metal, it's a magnesium. There's the MDT, which is like a carbon fiber. So yeah, that hasn't been a big concern for me, in terms of a con that isn't worth all the benefits that are there.
I can definitely see the appeal of using a chassis rifle on a hunt like that, where you're walking miles and miles and miles for days and days and days, and you don't need the rifle most of the time. And then you just get it off and open it up and get ready to shoot when the time comes. And It's just a much smaller package like that. Do you know what the whole thing weighs?
Yeah, it's right at 8 pounds, and that's with a suppressor and scope and everything.
That's good.
So.
Yeah. And so this shot you said was just under 300 yards?
Yep. Yeah, it was like, I forget the exact, but it's 270 something or right at 280. Yeah, and he was bedded and worked great. So yeah, I mean that worked great on that. The black bear I shot this spring was pretty similar. It was 300 yards. Actually I don't intend to be a long range guy, but there was a perfect scenario where I shot an elk pretty far this year. It worked great on that. And then I've shot a bunch of stuff super close as well, which is what I prefer.
You're right. Well, it sounds like that was almost picture perfect setup for you to use on this particular hunt.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying it's for everybody, everybody should get one, but yeah, for a hunt like this, you're packing in and out, and especially if you're shooting suppressed and you're trying to save even more length, it really has been a great setup.
What suppressor you use on it?
Thunder Beast.
Was this a question that I heard on your podcast where someone was wanted to know what the difference was between the Thunder Beast and the Banished Backcountry, how they compare to each other? Or was that a different suppressor I was thinking of?
No, you're exactly right. We haven't published anything on that yet, but essentially, I have a standard Banished because when I got it, they weren't making the Backcountry yet. But Steve more recently got the Banished Backcountry, and then he has the Thunder Beast Ultra 5. So spec-wise, they're relatively similar in like weight and length. And so we'll be doing some more shooting like to try and compare those two. But overall, I mean, I have a standard Banished. I have a Thunder Beast Ultra 7 and Ultra 5. There definitely is trade-offs to a smaller suppressor. Like the 5's not as quiet as the 7, and the 7's not as quiet as a Banished at 9 inches, right? But obviously you have to make some choices on overall length and then weight and then what you're willing to pack around. So like, I tell guys a lot, if you want one suppressor to do everything, something in that 7-inch range and something like the Thunder Beast Ultra 7 would be great. The Thunder Beast Ultra 5, like, yes, you're saving 2 inches and some ounces. It's definitely not something I would want to shoot recreationally or competitively, like a higher round count. But in the field, when it's like, okay, I'm shooting once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, and hopefully not more than that, it's great. Like it is still quiet. It's nothing like shooting unsuppressed. It has recoil benefits, sound reduction benefits. I've been like hunting exclusively with a suppressor for a few years now, and I mean it's dramatic the way that other game respond to it as well. Like they just don't spook as much, which even can be helpful for things like follow-up shots if you need one. So I think there's a lot of benefits to shooting suppressed, and then something like as a quote-unquote do-it-all suppressor if you hunt but also shoot somewhat recreationally or competitively, something in that 7-inch range is really a good sweet spot.
Yeah, I bought the Banish 30 a couple years ago, had it, I hunted with it last year, bought a Banish Backcountry, and I hunted with it this year. And I agree 100%, man. I mean, that Banish 30 is great at the range. Little bit of a pain afield, but man, the backcountry is definitely where it is at afield. So I have no experience with the Thunder Beast suppressor, so luckily that's something you guys will be able to perhaps shed some light on here soon. But man, as a hunting suppressor, I could not agree more that a 5-inch suppressor like that is so much nicer to carry than a 7 or a 9-inch suppressor.
Yeah, for sure.
So what taxidermy did you get done with this sheep?
I had just a euro, and some guys are like, "What?" And I will say this: there's so many gorgeous Dall Sheep mounts out there. I'm not even really into taxidermy much, or like traditional shoulder mounts. But there's been some pedestal Dall Sheep that I just like are gorgeous, and I thought about going that route. And then I also was, considering really every option. And for me, at the end of the day, as funny as this sounds, like I'm so like, these rams are so cool. And when you put your hands on one, it's so impressive. The weight of it and like the character of it and all that. And I knew for me, I couldn't do a mount and not be able to put my hands on the head and horns. And so it was like, all right, well, if I do a mount, I need to do a replica, right? Because I want the replica on the mount, and then I want the real thing to be able to put in my hands. And then I started looking at that, and there's amazing replicas out there. But then I was like, between the cost of taxidermy and a replica, I honestly wasn't willing to spend the money. And more than anything, I would have put my hands on it. So I had the skull beetle cleaned. And it turned out great. And then I have it hung in my house on a hanger where I can easily pick it up. And I'm not going to lie, I do that, man, not only to let people see it, but there's times I'll just like walk by it and stop by and pick it up and look at it. And for me, there's a lot of cool taxidermy. For me personally, seeing animals or me having animals is all about like the memories that it brings back and the experience. And so that's just what I did with it. Like even for me this year, I just got the bull elk that I shot this year. I had a different elk hanging in my living room that was bigger, but the one I just got back this year, I was like, no, I'm going to put this year's up because I want to, like right now, be able to look at that one and relive those memories. Like, so I don't care that it's not the biggest bull. That's the one I want to like look at every day right now because it triggers all these memories and events. And so for me, like, that's just what it's about.
All right. Well, good deal. I understand where you're coming from. I don't know that I'm ever going to shoot a sheep myself, but that is really cool being able to pick up and handle the horns like that and get a sense of the weight and not just kind of have it just sitting pretty on the wall or something like that. I have a Himalayan tar that I shot several years ago in New Zealand. I got a full body mount of it. And it looks beautiful. It's magnificent, but man, it's just it takes up so much darn space. There's not a lot of places you can put it,
Yeah. I was the same way with my mountain goat. They're like in tar are similar to me. Like there's certain animals like a mountain goat and a tar. It's like, I don't know, like a shoulder mount. It just for me, it doesn't work. And so it's like full bodies for an animal like that, mountain goat or tar, what I would want. And then it was the same thing. It's like, man, I really don't have space for a full body mountain goat. I ended up doing a rug actually with the mountain goat. But yeah, they're mountain goats and tar are similar in the sense that for me, part of the like trophy appeal of what makes those animals unique and cool isn't just the horns, but it's the hide. And so like having that just gorgeous hide is something you need, in my opinion.
So on this hunt, did you use a K4 pack or did you use something new and top secret you don't want to talk about?
No, I did use a K4. So we launched K4 in late March of this year, 2023. We definitely won't be changing it or releasing anything new anytime soon. We're probably historically we've been on like a roughly 4-year cycle of what it takes us to work on new ideas, test them thoroughly, etc. So I'm not going to lie, we are tinkering with other things already, but it's not a situation where it's like, bows drive me crazy how there's a new bow every year. And it's like, you can't re-engineer a bow every year and make massive improvements, right? Like, I think if bow companies would be willing to like not release a bow every year and release a bow every 4 or 5 years, they would make obviously more dramatic jumps and probably have more time to work on better technology. That's kind of where we're at with packs, but that's not a direct equivalent. So anyway, there's hunts that I've gone on already with some other tweaks and things, and Steve has done the same, but this sheep hunt in particular was a regular K4 pack, and it definitely is, in my mind, harder to even think about what we would do to K4. And I mean that sincerely of like, we're just super freaking happy with that pack. And even for me personally, I mean, yeah, you could say it's all just bias, but I mean, the whole reason we build these things is to use them. And after using it, since it's been released, but obviously as part of the development process before then, like, it's just such a great system.
All right. Well, good deal. Well, can you tell us just quickly what the travel was like getting to and from Alaska on this hunt, especially with all this, all the meat and the sheep you're bringing back home?
Yeah, this one was pretty logistically easy for Alaska. There's definitely been hunts where it's been tougher, but I was able to fly commercial to Fairbanks, which is where my guide Mark lives. And so he just picked me up at the airport, and then we were able to just use his transportation to get to where our starting point was for hiking. Again, this was most sheep hunts you're flying in. This was unique that we didn't. So there's no Super Cub or anything like that. So flew commercial to Fairbanks, and then same flying home. The meat I flew home with and just checked it. I've done that a ton from Alaska for a bunch of hunts. If you use what most people call a quote unquote fish box, it's just like a heavy duty cardboard box, and it comes with a foam insert to insulate things. And getting meat in those and checking meat is really easy. Alaska Airlines is so used to dealing with hunters and fishermen that you could go up there with a bunch of meat and even antlers and they don't blink an eye. One thing that was unique on this hunt was the timing of it. And when I killed my ram, and rams are something you physically have to check in with Alaska Fish and Game, they take a bunch of measurements, verify that it's legal, and then they drill it and plug it. So like a serialized insert basically gets put into this ram. And until that happens, it's not legal to transport it out of the state or actually possess it. So that has to be done in person. And the way that the dates fell, I ended up having to travel. What was it? I think we must have got out of the office on got out of the office. We must have got out of the field on like a Friday night. And so that they were closed Saturday and Sunday, but then they were also closed that Monday because of a holiday. So I actually had to travel home, leave my head and horns with Mark, who then had to physically check it in when the offices reopened, and then ship it to me.
Jeez.
So that was a weird feeling to like leave it and not fly with it, and then to worry about getting it home. But all we did, I brought all the meat and everything home, and he took it into Fish and Game. He's legal to possess it, as a guide and outfitter. So he went and checked it, and then we bought one of those totes from Home Depot. The black totes with the yellow lid that you see in all kinds of shapes and sizes.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. We just bought one of those and found the right size to drop the head and horns in. It's been frozen. And then sent it home on a plane and was able to pick it up. So it's actually pretty seamless.
Cool.
Yeah. But I would just say for anybody in general, flying back and forth, or thinking about an Alaska hunt or their first hunt, that's definitely one of the things that people sweat over. But it's actually logistically pretty easy, and especially when you're in Alaska and flying home with stuff, they're so used to it. You essentially pay, like your first bag's like say $40, and your second one is 80 or whatever. But like you can start to add extra items, and it's like $100, basically, for additional checked items, and pretty seamless to get stuff home.
Yeah, trying to overnight something that expensive or that big. It'd just be ungodly expensive. Whereas, $100
Yeah.
taking it on the plane with you is a no brainer, even shipping it like that afterwards. Anything else we need to talk about with this hunt? That was a pretty wild story. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I think especially the darn guy coming out of your tent like that after he shot that sheep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I covered a lot of it. If people have questions like on logistics or gear or something like that, I'm definitely an open book there. So people can reach me pretty easily through Exo. Just send us an email and it'll get my way. I'm happy to help. And I haven't done it yet. I will be doing we did a podcast on our podcast kind of with the story, and I've talked a little bit about gear, but the fall's been so busy with the rest of my hunts. I haven't done a follow-up that's more in-depth on like the specific gear I used or what was unique to a hunt like this versus what most backpack hunting that I do in the lower 48. So even though this hunt's a few months behind us at this point, I actually still have some more content coming out, questions from listeners, stuff like that I will be answering over the next couple months. So there's actually more to come in that regard.
Well, awesome. As we wrap up, why don't you talk about your podcast and all of that stuff?
Yeah, it's called the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. As the name implies, we talk mostly about backcountry hunting, everything from kind of tips and tactics stuff, but tell stories, including listener stories, interview people in the industry. We do an episode on Mondays called the Monday Minute. That's just like more informal questions. We answer listener questions that are come to us, and we'll answer those. It's pretty much, wherever you're finding this podcast, I'm sure you can find that one, whether it's Spotify or Apple or what have you. And then Exo Mountain Gear, we just make pack systems for this type of hunting, for backcountry hunting. And it's EXO, that's EXO mountaingear.com. So if you want to check that stuff out, and if you're not interested in packs, we do have like some cool stuff we give away. We just try to be a helpful resource of information as well. So whether it's the podcast, we have like a free backcountry hunting training plan. We have a free gear list spreadsheet. There's just a lot of, helpful information there that even if you don't want to buy a pack, that's no problem, but there's probably some stuff you'd be interested in checking out either way.
Yeah, I will put links to where you can check out the Hunt Backcountry Podcast and the Exo website in the show notes. I'll also put some links to some previous discussions Mark and I have had about their packs and whatnot. Before I let you go, I'll just tell you a quick story. A friend of mine drew an elk tag this year. This was going to be his first serious elk hunt. And he's like, John, what do I need? He's an Army guy. He's like, I was just planning on using my rucksack. And I was like, don't use your rucksack. Just get a real pack with a frame that you're going to use to carry this elk out. And I was like, listen, this elk, when you shoot it, it's going to be a lot bigger and a lot heavier, and it's going to be a lot harder getting it out than you anticipated. And he had a cow tag, and he ended up shooting a good-sized cow. And I think it was about 2 miles in one way. And he had a friend of his with him. And he had an Exo K4, and he's like, oh, my God, John. It was really hard getting that thing out of there, but I'm so glad I had that pack instead of my rucksack.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I've been there and done that. I've, hunted with other packs before Exo even existed, much less I worked for him. So I've certainly had some pain moments, and I think almost take for granted now. Like, I was amazed, like that 15-mile pack out was tough, but I was actually amazed at how destroyed I didn't feel the next day, and it's like I'm so used to a good pack and staying active that I forget sometimes like how miserable it can be.
Yeah, I don't know that it's ever quote unquote easy, but you can make it really hard if
right.
if things aren't, if you don't have the right gear and are making poor decisions out there.
For sure.
Well, Mark, it was wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this really awesome sheep hunt today that had a lot of adversity, yet also a happy ending to it too.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was fun. It was good to, like I said, good to connect with you again.
All right. Take care. As I was going through my notes after the show, I realized that Mark is actually the 5th successful sheep hunter I've had on the podcast to talk about their experience. So first up was Dan Roland. Back in episode 92, he talked about another Dall Sheep hunt. Steve Speck is Mark's partner on the Hunt Backcountry Podcast, and he is the owner of Exo Mountain Gear. He talked about his successful Bighorn sheep hunt in Idaho in episode 168. Joseph von Benedikt also came on the show to share a story of another successful Bighorn sheep hunt in episode 174. And then we had Ron Spomer on in episode 201 to talk about his successful bighorn, Dall, and stone sheep hunts in Idaho, Alaska, and Canada. So check those episodes out as well to hear some more successful sheep hunting stories. Now, those 5 guys had some pretty different sheep hunting experiences. They were hunting, in some cases, different types of sheep in different areas, that sort of things. This is the sort of hunt where you can probably shoot something inside of 200 yards on occasion, but a 500 to 600 yard shot is also a possibility in country like that as well. Having the skill level and equipment necessary for making a longer shot like that can mean the difference between success and failure. Now, like Mark and I discussed, you do not want a rifle that is excessively heavy either. Mark put in some serious miles during the course of that hunt with a rifle on his back, and lugging a 9 or 10 pound rifle up and down those mountains, as well as during that really long pack out, would have added a whole new level of difficulty to the hunt. Because remember, not only is he carrying his rifle and part of the sheep, but you're also carrying all the gear that you need to survive out there as well. So sheep aren't gigantic animals, and if you're splitting it between you and a guide, that definitely makes it easier, but that's still a lot of weight on that pack out, potentially. And you combine that with a lot of miles, and then that's the sort of time that you'd really be happy to have a 7-pound rifle instead of a 10-pound rifle. Now, Mark was using a custom rig in 7mm SAUM, and it worked great for him. That's a 7mm Remington Short Action Ultra Magnum. That is a great cartridge for guys who like to tinker and who want a good platform to build a custom hand load that delivers great performance out of a short action rifle. Really, that was the cartridge to use for this sort of work for a long time, and it still works great. The only problem is you basically need to hand load for it. Nosler makes one factory load, and Remington makes another factory load for the 7 SAUM, but that's really about it. And so if you want something like Mark had with that 175 grain ELDX bullet, which is a great bullet for this sort of hunt, well, you got to hand load for it. Now, if I were going on a sheep hunt in the sort of country Mark was hunting in, I'd probably be carrying something like a 6.5 PRC, though there are some other cartridges that will also potentially work really well in that role, like the 7mm PRC, and you can get that 175 grain ELDX in a factory load from both Federal and Hornady right now for the 7 PRC, and then you can use the 143 grain ELDX in a factory load for the 6.5 PRC, and there's some other bullets that'll work really well too. But bottom line, there is more to it than just saying you want to hunt with a 6.5 or a 7 PRC, though, and your specific rifle, sighting system, and ammo are also extremely important parts of the equation. Because remember, you need something that's light and easy to carry, but you also don't want a rifle that's so light it's hard to shoot accurately at extended range either. Sheep aren't known for being extremely tough creatures, but you still do need something with enough power to ethically and cleanly take down a sheep when you do hit it, though. Sheep hunts are very precious commodities. Even the wealthiest and the luckiest hunters don't get to go on that many sheep hunts in their lives. And really, for guys like me and for Mark and whatnot, if you go on one sheep hunt in your life, you're in the top 1% of hunters with that stuff. So you need to make those opportunities count when you do get them. Additionally, in that sort of terrain, it's also extremely important to minimize the distance the sheep runs after taking a hit. There are lots of horror stories of wounded sheep and mountain goats running or falling off cliffs in the mountains, and that can destroy their meat and their horns, and it can also make recovery extremely difficult, potentially dangerous, maybe even impossible, depending on the details. Fortunately for you, there are entire modules in the Hunting Guns 101 training dedicated to the strengths and weaknesses of lighter and easier to carry rifles that have good extended range capabilities, the trade-offs associated with using them, specific rifle recommendations for those hunting situations, specific scope recommendations for different hunting situations, and in-depth information on ammunition selection for hunting almost any species of game in the world, to include sheep. I guarantee you'll learn lots of useful information about practical ballistics and firearms in general in that training that'll help you be more successful in the field and fill more tags on your hunts. Among other things, you will learn things like what you need to know about 2 extremely important but often overlooked aspects of bullet performance on game. A vital lesson new hunters can learn from the life-altering mistake made by one of the founding fathers of premium ammunition. Thorough debunks of 2 dangerous myths about ballistics commonly passed off as fact in the hunting industry, but can lead to disaster on a hunt for those that believe those myths the dangerous and expensive mistakes many hunters make when selecting a scope for their hunting rifle, and 2 clever tricks that can help you shoot more accurately with heavier recoiling cartridges. Click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com/form and fill out the order form to sign up and get instant access today. That's huntingguns101.com/form, FORM. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.